months in, and I'm new to this space too. So it's nice to be here in person with you all.
Welcome, Melissa. Thank you.
I'm John Watson with the Division of Criminal Justice Services, Office of Legal Services, on behalf of ICAOS.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Shana Kern, and I am the Compact Office Coordinator in the Division of Criminal Justice, Office of Probation and Correctional Alternatives within the Interstate Unit. And I'm the supervisor of the adult as well as the juvenile. And the juvenile, I do the juvenile DCA, the Deputy Compact Administrator for the juvenile interstate as well.
I'm Kelly Palmatier. I'm the Deputy Compact Administrator for the Interstate Compact for Adult Offender Supervision for Probation.
Thank you, Kelly. And I think we're going to move those that are joining us remote. Chelsea, do you mind starting us off?
I'm Chelsea Bisveri. I'm the Executive Deputy Director for the New York State Board of Parole.
Thank you, Chelsea. Don?
Good morning, everyone. Don Harris. I'm one of the Assistant Commissioners here representing Commissioner Daniel Marticello, Scott Herto, who's the Interstate Bureau Chief from New York State Docs, who's also the New York State Deputy Compact Administrator, could not make it today, so I'm representing him as well.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate that. And working behind the scenes for us, Katie?
Very nice.
I'm sure she's a woman. And I see Chairman Towns has joined us. Chairman, would you mind introducing yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Daryl Towns, Chairman of the New York State Parole Board.
Thank you, Chair Towns. So I will, as I said, welcome everyone. And thank you all for introductions. I would note that we still have one vacancy on our council, and that is a Senate appointment. We are working through regular channels to try to get that filled. I will note out of attendance today, but hopefully here soon is Assemblyman David Weprin, a longtime council member, active council member. So I do hope Assemblyman Weprin does join us, and Assemblyman Eric DeLon is also not here today, but hopefully joins the council. First thing I would ask you to do is, in your packets, you will all have a packet of information, is take a look at the agenda and, take a look for a minute, and then I'll ask for a vote approving today's agenda. If anybody wants to add anything, that would be the time to do so. Do I have a motion to approve today's agenda?
So moved.
And seconded by thank you. Next on the list, I would ask you to please take a look at the minutes of our last meeting from May of 2025. And just take a look. If you haven't had the opportunity to take a look at them, we've sent them out on a couple of occasions. I would ask that you briefly review those. And if there's any questions or corrections we can make, put that on the record. If not, I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes of Thursday, May 15th, 2025 for our last council meeting. Do I have a motion to approve? And Senator Salas. Thank you. What we do every time we meet, we try to just go over our mission statement quickly, kind of keep us focused on the council's purpose. I will go ahead and read that mission statement. The mission of the New York State Council for the Interstate Compact for Adult Offender Supervision is to serve as an advisory body to the State Compact Administrator, make recommendations for implementation of state policies and procedures that facilitate the effective tracking, supervision, and rehabilitation of individuals under community supervision, advance their orderly transfer across state lines, and promote public and victim safety. So we just like to read that every time we start a meeting, to make sure that we're focused on the mission of the council. Today's agenda is primarily going to be looking at rules that the commission had reviewed and voted on in our past annual business meeting, which was held in San Juan, Puerto Rico, this past late September into early October. Prior to that, as we do every time, we're going to take a look at some of the data metrics. For those of you who may be new, the commission audits each state 4 times a year on a quarterly basis. They look at 6 metrics in terms of how states are doing in certain areas. And for those of you who might not be aware, New York's a bifurcated state, meaning that probation and parole are separate. And so we have in the packets, we have both metrics for the probation side of the house, which is here at PCJS, and the parole side of the house, which is over at New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. In your packets, they're split out, but right now I think what I'd ask Kelly to do is take a look at those metrics for New York State as a whole, which is really what the commission looks at. They don't look at the bifurcation. They look at New York State, how New York State is performing as a whole. I will say, traditionally, New York State is in the top 8 of busiest compacts nationwide. New York State probation in New York State is administered at the county level. So there are 58 probation departments, which Kelly and Shana have to kind of wrangle and get to comply with the rules and regulations of the Interstate Compact. And the parole supervision, as I said, in the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. So Kelly, can you just take us through the statewide statistics, please?
Sure. So you should have 3 different documents in your packet, which Matt had said. The one that says New York State compliance is obviously the state's compliance as a whole. That includes both probation and parole numbers. So we'll begin with the case closure compliance. So there's a requirement on the receiving state or the supervising state to submit a case closure notice to the sending state within 10 business days of the supervision end date. So our passing compliance percentage is considered 80% or higher, and we are at 92.2% in that measure, and the national average is at 96.5%. For the case closure reply compliance, the sending state or the sentencing state has an obligation to respond to that case closure notice that is received within 10 business days of receiving it from the supervising state. We are at 97.5% compliant in that area as a state. The national average is at 92.5%. Moving on to the request for progress reports. When the sentencing state requests the supervising state provide an updated progress report, that supervising state has 30 calendar days to submit that report to the sending state. And so in that area, we are at 89.8% statewide, and the national average is 91.9%. For the reporting instructions, I know Melissa's new. The reporting instructions allow a supervised individual to be present in the receiving state or the state that they're requesting to transfer to while their transfer is pending investigation. So when the receiving state, receives a request for reporting instructions, they have 2 business days to respond to that request. Or if it's for an individual who's on supervision or meets the definition of a sex offender, the receiving state has 5 business days. So we're, as a state, are at 97% compliance in that area. The national average is 97.8%. For the transfer replies, the receiving state has 45 days to conduct an investigation on the proposed plan and to submit their response indicating that they're going to accept or reject supervision. Our compliance with meeting that 45-day timeframe is 95.6%, and the national average is 95.3%. And then finally, our violation response compliance. When the supervising state submits a violation report to the sentencing state, that sentencing state has 10 business days to respond to that violation, advising them on what action they're going to take. So New York State is at 97.6% compliance in that area, and the national average is 89.4%.
Thank you, Kelly. And, just a point, as you can see, New York State being one of the busiest compact offices in the nation, we are doing extremely well. And so I want to acknowledge Kelly and Shana that work at the probation end, as well as the parole interstate office, really doing really good things. What I'd like to do is really kind of break this down to make it kind of practical where each of these fit. And I always use this example when I'm doing some training. If I was to go down, I was to take a vacation. I live here in Albany, it's where I work, it's where my family is. If I were to go down a vacation to Florida, and I was arrested for a felony DWI, convicted of that felony DWI, now in a court in Florida. And so obviously I need to go back home because now I'm sentenced to probation in that court in Florida. I need to go back home because this is where I live, this is where my family is, this is where all my supports are. Because I have a felony, I cannot return to my home, to New York, unless I'm approved for the interstate compact. So a transfer request takes the receiving state, which would be New York, has 45 days to investigate Florida's transfer request to bring me back to New York. Obviously, I don't want to wait 45 days in Florida while New York is investigating my transfer because I cannot be in New York until New York approves. So that's why reporting instructions are important. They allow somebody to come home immediately during the pendency of that investigation. So those are the reporting instructions and the transfer request. In terms of the progress reports, Florida always maintains jurisdiction. Only the supervision is transferred to New York State. Florida's going to want to know, hey, how's Matt Charton doing in New York? Is he doing well? Is he doing bad? Is he doing what the court wants him to do? So they can request a progress report of New York supervision about how well Matt Charton's doing, and that's where the progress reports come in terms of the request and the response that New York has to give to Florida. So if I say I'm not doing so well and I violate my conditions, whether I get new arrest or new conviction, New York can file a violation on me to the court in Florida. That's the violation requiring retaking that would be submitted through this kind of federal system to tell Florida Matt Charton has violated his conditions and we're requesting revocation of his supervision from the court in Florida. That's how the violation, that's the purpose of the violation. And then Florida can then respond to New York to say, okay, we are going to issue a warrant. We are going to tell Matt Charton to return here on his own, or we are going to, do something else. That's the reply. And let's say that that's handled and I'm still under supervision in New York, but I reach my maximum expiration date when I'm off of parole and probation, and that's when, New York would submit a case closure notice saying Matt Charton's reached his maximum expiration. We are asking Florida to close his case, and Florida responds saying, yes, he's reached his maximum expiration. We agree the case is now closed in Florida. And so that's how kind of all of those fit into the transfer request reply. Important timeframes are, there are timeframes on each of them because it is important that we recognize, and I know Kelly and Shayna in our office and Scott in his office always really kind of emphasize that there's a person behind these cases. There's somebody waiting to get back home, or there's somebody waiting to get where they need to go for whatever reason. And so that those are really things that we focus on both in our interstate transfers, is that it's not just a number or a case. There's actually a person, there's a family, there's opportunities, and that we want to make sure that we're putting people either under parole supervision or probation supervision in the best place where they're going to be the most successful. And so that with that thought at hand, all of these things kind of fit into that. So, any questions on how we
Thank you for the example. That was really helpful. And thank you, Dana and Kelly, for all your work on this, these very high percentages. I don't think we're at risk of going below 80%, but what are the consequences if we were to go below 80%?
So they have a compliance committee, which is made up of memberships of each of a certain select states. I happen to be on that compliance committee for the adults. So when they do, you would first get a note from the compliance committee saying in this quarter you were below 80%. You need to have a plan of action to rectify that. If you have a state who's continuously below that 80%, the national office can and has for a variety of reasons kind of sanctioned a state. We've seen states be sanctioned anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000 for non-compliance with certain either metrics that the commission has, or practice that's non-compliant with the interstate compact rules and regulations. So it's rarely, most of the that I've been involved in, fines have been held in abeyance in terms of a state giving a plan of action to correct. And most states have done that. I will say there is a state out there that we just voted on recently that couldn't come into compliance, and they were fined $25,000. If the state disputes that, then it's in the federal district court of Kentucky, where the national office for the commission is located in Kentucky and Lexington. So any court proceedings would be held in federal court. But again, the metrics are important. But we always look about the practice. What's the practice behind these metrics, and how do we strengthen and improve our practices behind these metrics? Any other questions? So we're now getting to what you all came for. We're going to give you an update and hopefully have a discussion about the 2025 interstate and business meeting. It's going to be San Juan. Kelly and I both participated. It was from September 30th to October 1. And at that time, the commission voted on a number of rules. I'm going to ask Kelly to tell you how many in a minute. Rules and rule amendments that impact the practice of supervision. I will say each state or territory has one commission member voting members. Well, the commissioner, the interstate commissioner, New York State, that's me. Each state or territory has one person who that is, and those are the people that vote on the rules for the interstate rule changes. And with that, Kelly, discussion.
Sure, I can start. So those commission members all gather at the annual business meeting every year, and they vote on, well, every other year is a meeting here for rules. If there are proposed rules that come from different regions, could come from the East region, South region, any region can, submit a proposal. And that goes and is vetted through the rules committee. There's also a rules committee that there are different, players from across the nation, that sit on that committee. They vet the rules and then they put them out for vote by the commission. So every year, commission members gather and every other year they vote on, rule changes. So this year there happened to be 20 total rules, that were proposed, which I think was probably the largest number of rule proposals that I have ever seen in 1 year. And so I gave you a chart that kind of breaks them down just to what the rule proposal was number wise, and then what the impact on practice is going to be. And then I also gave you the vote if I was able to capture that. There were two, I think, that I didn't get the exact voting that happened, but so to start it off, I'll just go.
Before you start, I just want to note that our victim representative, Lisa Good, has joined us. Lisa, if you don't mind just introducing yourselves to everybody here in person and as well as those who are joining us remotely.
Hello, my name is Lisa Good. I live in New York and I'm the director of Urban Grief and Public Victim Services to underserved.
Appreciate that. Sorry, Kelly.
That's okay. So to start it off, the first rule that was voted on was actually a package of rules. And it included the definition, the current definition of abscond, the absconder violation rule, which outlines what a supervising state must do to declare an individual an absconder. And then the retaking absconders rule, which speaks to the requirements of the sending state once that absconder violation is received by the supervising state. So that was proposed as a package. So we had to vote up, yes or no on all three of those proposals together. As you can see from the vote, it was pretty split, 24-25. It did pass. We were one of the states that voted no to this package for a number of reasons, but the impact that these changes will have on practice is that the receiving state must now contact community agencies providing services to the individual and conduct record checks, utilizing available databases to declare an individual an absconder, which we were in agreement with, and we think that's a great idea. I would say that most of our county probation departments, anyway, I can speak for the probation side, are already doing those things in practice, but it was not a requirement by rule. By rule, they were only required to conduct a home visit to their last known place of residence, contact their last known place of employment, and to contact family and collateral contacts. So they have added this additional language, which they will be required now to include information on those attempts in their violation report. The receiving state will now have an obligation to wait 30 calendar days to submit that violation report unless there are extenuating circumstances. So the new rule does outline certain circumstances where they can forego that 30-day time frame, but they will have to wait 30 calendar days to ensure that that person is actually an absconder. That was something that we did not agree with, was having to wait when we have declared somebody an absconder, and our probation departments or parole officers are remaining responsible for supervision during that time. The receiving state will no longer have an obligation to retake if the individual is located within 30 days of the warrant that is issued by the sending state. So the sending state is obligated to issue a full extradition warrant once they receive an absconder violation report. So if that individual is located within 30 calendar days of the date that warrant is issued, then retaking is no longer required if both states agree to that. This package will also require the state where the individual is located to conduct a probable cause hearing. And then the sending state only has an obligation to retake from the receiving state. So if somebody, in Matt's example, if he was sentenced to probation in Florida, he moves to New York, but he absconds to California, Florida would not have an obligation to retake that person from California. However, if he was located within New York, they would have an obligation to come in. We would have to take him into custody on the warrant, conduct the probable cause hearing, and then Florida would have to come and retake him if probable cause was found. Are there any questions about that?
For the last two you went through, Kelly, did New York State agree with those?
No, we were not for any of the proposed changes to the absconder section.
Yeah, I think what the commission found was that a lot of times when, in all violations, was when that person was located or when they were retaken to the sending state, I think it was 75% of the time that they were coming right back. You know, they were going back to the send, going back. In my issue, I was violated in New York. I was sent back to Florida, and I was in 6 months. I was right back in New York State. So they're trying to avoid that unnecessary back and forth. One, it's costly. I know for probation departments, if I'm asking Chemung County, a little county in New York State, to go to Florida and pick somebody up and bring them back to Chemung, that's usually 75% of the DA's budget for a county that small. So they're trying to reduce that kind of rebound effect of people coming back and forth. Other times, I think what they're looking at is making sure that somebody has truly absconded. A lot of times that hiding in plain sight, they moved from one street to the other, that states were not really doing their due diligence in trying to locate that person before declaring them an absconder and then requiring the other state to issue a warrant and come and retake them, which again is kind of costly. What caught us, why we voted no on this, was the 30 days that you had to wait before declaring somebody an absconder. Because in New York State, probation departments generally have their own internal policies that say you've got to look for this person for 30 days before you can declare an absconder. All right, and then we have to wait 30 more days after that. So the time frames were really getting a little too long for us, knowing that we still have supervision responsibility over that person, and now we're on day 45, and we don't know where that person is, and yet we're kind of handcuffed and ready and declaring that person absconder. So we did vote no based on that. If they had moved that time frame, in the 30 days and kept it at 30 days, I think we would have been, more inclined to vote for this to reduce that kind of rebounding effect. But the other part we had an issue was, and Kelly talked about at the end, is a state can't retake an individual if they're found in another state, which most, generally a true absconder, they likely left the state, or they're moving, they're getting as far away as possible, which most times means they're in another state. So if they're located in that state, that means, Florida cannot, in our case, if I move from here to Massachusetts, Florida can't retake me from Massachusetts. I have to be found in New York State. So those are the two reasons that we decided that we were going to vote no on this. It did pass, so these are now this is now the law of the land in the federal compact scope or space.
When, in your example, when you went to Massachusetts, who is now responsible for getting you New York responsible for getting you from Mass? Or no? I mean, I know Florida's jurisdiction, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you just stay in Mass and nobody's searching for you, or what happened?
Well, there's a warrant an NCIC issued from Florida, so Massachusetts would pick me up and hold me. But now, there's two different processes somebody can return. It's one is retake under the rules of the interstate compact, and then there's the fugitive from justice process, which requires a little bit more. So I'm assuming if Florida really wanted that person, that they could, follow the extradition process, the fugitive from justice process. But New York would not. The problem is in that scenario is New York still has supervision responsibility of it. So they are really, so it's very difficult to have responsibility to supervise somebody. You don't have any idea where they are or what they're doing. And as Kelly pointed out, there are some exceptions to the rule where you can declare them an absconder earlier.
I can tell.
Was one of them Kelly moving to another country? Because we've had a lot of those recently. They just left the US. They're gone.
Yeah.
What's in the scope of it?
So
Okay.
the receiving state may forego the 30-day requirement if the individual is alleged to have committed a new criminal offense of a violent, sexual, or serious nature, if the individual has fled the apprehension of law enforcement or escaped detention, the individual has removed an electronic monitoring GPS device, or if the individual has a documented history of violent behavior, escalating violations, or is a clear risk to victim safety. So in those circumstances, the supervising state would not have to wait that 30-day time frame to submit the violation report. Which makes sense, but I think the argument could be that they're all a risk, right? So I don't know. We'll have to see how that plays out.
Any questions?
I'm just trying to figure out the voting process. Did you all have time to debate and share opinions beforehand, and people were moved to vote different ways, and the extenuating circumstances, were those decided on the spot, or those were part of the proposal? How did those, what was the creation of those like?
So each, it's split into 4 regions. And East region, which New York State is part, meets on a quarterly basis. And so we had the opportunity to look at these rules and kind of debate them with our East region states. At the annual business meeting, there's a very brief time, not as much time as we would have liked, not the opportunity that we would have liked to speak on each rule proposal. It's very time limited though, and you can have 7 hands up still wanting to have a comment, and they say, sorry, time's up, remove it out of the next. And then the next day is the actual rule.
I also think, at the annual business meeting, when the commissioners there, their states have already decided how they're gonna vote. And so even if they hear something on the floor that might compel them to change their vote, they're not changing it because that's what they've already set, have a set vote in mind. So it is complicated. I feel like we almost need to have one annual business meeting where we discuss them and then the next one we vote, but.
And one of the things I've always wanted to do is bring the state council more into that process of looking at the rules, commenting on it. We did it, I don't know, what was it, a year ago in the spring before. So, but I really want to have kind of active conversation with council members about their thoughts on the rules and the impact on practice in New York.
Okay, so there were a couple definition changes that really have no impact on practice. The definition of compact administrator that passed unanimously. That was just a change to language to make that definition meet the definition that is in the statute that governs the interstate compact. The definition of relocate also passed. With really no impact on practice. It just removed in any 12-month period time frame in the definition, which really doesn't mean anything. I don't think anybody used that when they were using the definition of relocate anyway. The definition of revocation, there was also no impact on practice in New York anyway. This may have an impact in other states who use the term to mean something other than rescinding probation or parole and imposing a jail sentence. I know there were a couple states that voted no on that, 7 obviously, but that really will have no practice on change in practice in New York. The definition, moving on to Rule 2.106, which speaks to deferred sentences and how they qualify for transfer under the Interstate Compact. This change was simply putting what our current practice is into rule, and it just clarifies that supervised individuals must meet eligibility requirements in Rule 3.101, which details that they have to have, be in substantial compliance, have 90 days or more remaining on supervision, have a valid plan of supervision, all of those things to qualify for transfer. And they also must have waived their right to a speedy trial and entered a plea of guilt or no contest that was accepted by the court. So any cases, deferred sentences that meet that criteria would qualify for transfer under the Interstate Compact. That is currently our practice. The rule just didn't outline it in that much detail. Moving on to rule, does anybody have any questions about those? Okay, so the transfer of supervised individuals into the compact, the changes proposed in this rule that have passed will change our practice. The receiving state and sending state will have the discretion to allow an individual who's in the receiving state in violation of the compact to remain in the receiving state on approved reporting instructions and pending transfer investigation and response. I will say that this is practice for some states. I mean, we work with other compact states when they say, we had this situation happen, this person's in your state, we didn't know they were in your state, is there anything that we can do? And we try to work together depending on the case and the situation. And in those cases, we would say, sure, we would reach out to our county probation department, have a discussion with them, and if they agree to allow them to remain there, then we would just say, sure, please submit a request for reporting instructions and allow them to stay. So this rule is really just putting that practice into writing. So for us, it's not going to really have an impact on our practice, but for other states, it may. And in those situations, if the receiving state does not agree to allow that person to remain in their state, then that sending state would have to order them to return. If they fail to return, then they would be obligated to issue a full extradition warrant for that person. Any questions about that rule? Okay. Rule 3.101-3 was reporting instructions for sex offenders, and then there is a new rule. This is actually the new rule. We have voted on changing these two rules, so they kind of separated out the transfer request process and the reporting instructions process that were included in Rule 3.101-3 together. They've separated them out and made them one rule for reporting instructions and one rule for transfer requests. And it adds language to account for remote sentencing. It would allow the sending state to grant a travel permit if an individual is traveling to the receiving state for work or maybe, healthcare reasons, has approved reporting instructions or was sentenced remotely. So that was the changes that had been made to that rule. And then the impact on process here, the sending state would need to provide, they did add this requirement as well. The sending state will need to provide a copy of the sentencing document with their request if it's available. Currently, there is no obligation in any of the rules for the sending state to provide a copy of the sentencing document. The requirement is just to have the copy of the conditions of supervision. So in the sex offense cases, it's important, especially when we're sending it to the board. We send each incoming case that is sexual in nature, we send to the New York State Board of Examiners, and they would review the case to make a determination, registration determination in New York. So they often need that sentencing document to do that. So that will help us in.
Yeah, I'm very happy about this.
Yeah. So there are 20 rules total, just if I didn't mention that earlier. There's a lot. Moving on to 3.102, which is a submission of transfer request to a receiving state and a new rule. These rules passed, and it's moving the reporting instructions. There's how many? Okay, so if there is somebody who was sentenced to probation in Florida, and then they were extradited back to New York, and then they received a jail sentence here, and they're being released, or prison sentence, and they're being released, and now they want to remain here in New York, they're eligible for mandatory reporting instructions to be able to remain here while their transfer request is pending. That was kind of worked into the transfer request rule, which really didn't make any much sense. So they are taking that out, giving it its own rule, and that's the two changes that we were voting on. Those changes passed. I unfortunately didn't catch what the actual vote was for that. But practice now will be that the sending state will have an obligation to provide documentation or details regarding how the supervised individual's residence in the receiving state was verified. So how are they, how did they verify that this is where they're living, that this is their plan? The time frame for the submission of the request for reporting instructions will change from within 2 business days of release from incarceration to 10 business days. So often, people are being released. The state that has an active supervision case doesn't realize that they have been released, and so they're not meeting that 2 business day time frame. So they have increased that time frame to 10 business days. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but and then the receiving state will also have the ability to deny that request should the residence be invalid due to existing state law or policy. So if the plan proposed address is one that violates state law or policy, they can reject those mandatory reporting instructions, and the individual would have to leave New York while their transfer is pending. That rule is also going to add a requirement for the receiving state to assist in obtaining signatures on all required forms. So that will put some added requirements on our probation departments and parole offices to obtain signatures on the offender application, which is required for transfer, maybe conditions of supervision. I don't know what that's going to look like exactly. Are there any questions about that? Okay, moving on to the mandatory reporting instructions for supervised individuals living in the receiving state at time of sentencing or after the disposition of a violation or revocation proceeding. Unfortunately, this rule passed. This was not something that we were in favor of, and this has been a long argument over with states for half of the nation, I think, feels one way and half feels another when it comes to this rule. This will allow, for an example, an absconder, somebody who absconds to New York, to be eligible for mandatory reporting instructions to remain here after their violation has been disposed of in the sending state. So the receiving state will have an obligation to grant reporting instructions to individuals who have absconded to the receiving state in violation of the compact. The time frame for the submission will change from 7 business days to 10 business days following sentencing or disposition of the violation, or release from incarceration of 90 days or less. That used to be 6 months. So if somebody received a split sentence in New York, for example, and they were serving 6 months followed by 5 years probation, when they were released from incarceration after, during that 6 months, then they would be eligible for mandatory reporting instructions to go home if they were living in the other state at time of sentencing. Now the transfer request will have to be submitted while they're incarcerated, and they'll have to have an official acceptance before that person can go. So that's going to be a change in practice for our probation departments anyway.
So just in terms of this one and why we voted no, and we'll use a real life example. We had an individual who applied for transfer to New York State from New Jersey, found out that he was coming here to be closer to the victim of his domestic violence offenses. There was really no reason for that. New Jersey explained to us. Sorry to point out New Jersey, but I will. New Jersey explained to us any other reason why he would want to relocate to New York. So it was a discretionary transfer. We denied the request. He and said, it doesn't appear he has any other reason to come to New York, and we recognize that the victim of his domestic violence offenses does reside in the same location, not the exact location, but in the same proximity of where he wishes to relocate to. That person then absconds from probation in New Jersey, ends up in New York State, living in the place where New York State told him we could. We had no idea. New Jersey ends up issuing a warrant for his arrest, and he's located in and around where the victim is residing, and he's returned to New Jersey. He's released after his court appearance. He comes right back to New York, and now New Jersey says he's living there. He's been there for a while. We want to, we think that he's obligated now because he's been resentenced on the violation. He's obligated. You're obligated to issue reporting instructions. We fought that, saying no. He doesn't even. There's no reason for him to be here. He's only here for the purpose of what we believed was to continue to stalk, harass, or even harm the victim of his offenses. And New Jersey's position was, you have to issue that. We fought that and lost that fight. Because the rule, what they consider the plain language of that rule, requires us to issue those reporting instructions. So he was not under the compact supervision when he came to New York and he absconded. He was only under supervision in New Jersey. There was New York had nothing to do with it. We denied the transfer request. Now he decided to say, okay, I'm going to abscond and come live in New York. And that way he got to stay here in New York. And obviously that for us, that presents some very concerning, situations where we think that there's could certainly be a harm to the victim because he's allowed to stay here until New York can, investigate a transfer request. And we'd have to deny that, but that's a period of up to, 75 days where that could be something along those times where he could continue to live here. And New Jersey doesn't have to remove him. Only, we lose sleep over this stuff. They're wondering what could happen to that victim, which is, ABM in New York City in 2022, we heard from 3 victims of stalking. And they described those same exact circumstances, how this person had literally across the United States followed them, and the fear and the danger that causes. And we just thought, I thought, and Kelly thought that this is just creating a circumstance, an unneeded circumstance for that scenario to happen. So we voted against it. Unfortunately, we lost. I'll just, the other argument is, well, if somebody absconds from supervision, they end up in New York, they've been here for 10 years, they're working, they're in school, they're now married, they have a home. Why would you then take that guy and make him go back to New Jersey in those circumstances? In those cases, there's something called discretionary reporting instructions where if New Jersey says all this stuff, and we have the opportunity to look at that and say, okay, you're right. Why would we make this guy go back to New Jersey? Then we can accept them. So it's not an all or nothing thing, but it is now. Now it's that person has a right to stay here, regardless of the circumstances.
Hey, Matt,
Yes.
Darrell Towns here. Are we
Sure.
generally more receiving or sending state?
Receiving.
I didn't hear what you said.
Are we generally more the receiving or sending?
Receiving state, by far.
Everyone wants to come to New York.
Yeah, it's a destination. New York City's a destination. You can make it there.
Yeah.
They're all coming to Bushwick. They're all coming to Bushwick these days, right, Senator?
That's right.
So in that kind of case, what did the supervision of that person look like since you had to provide supervision for them or conditions for them?
Well, we had to provide, New York City, it was in New York City, they had to provide supervision for that person in the meantime. And what did it look like? We have to go back and ask DOP on what exactly they did to ensure that they were safe. But what, generally what we'd say is we want that person to be returned to, in this case, New Jersey, so we can at least get some victim advocacy contacts for that individual, a safety plan set up before that person is being able to return here, New York State. Never given the opportunity to do that.
And who would be responsible for notifying the victim that the person is in the area in a case like that?
Under the compact rules, the sending state has the responsibility for victim notification.
So that's why we voted against
Yeah.
it. By law.
Moving on to the acceptance of supervised individuals and the issuance of reporting instructions. This rule proposal was passed. It really was just wordsmithing. There were no change to practice anywhere, which was good. 3.108 is the victim's right to be heard and comment. This also really was wordsmithing. There's no real change to practice. The sending state has the authority, must inform victims of the supervised individual of their right to be heard and commented upon receiving a request for the transferred individual to return to the sending state, but also at the time the initial transfer request is being submitted. So when that individual is requesting to leave the sentencing state, the sentencing state is supposed to notify the victim of their right to be heard and comment as well. So
They're providing comment to the sending state, or is it both the sending?
I am not, honestly, I'm not sure. I think probably the sending.
Yeah, sending state.
Because their transfer is made at the discretion of the sending state and is a privilege, not a right under the interstate compact, so. Moving on to the travel permits, and was just a change to the section of the rule. So the rule itself didn't change. They just moved it to section 4, which covers supervision in the receiving state. Right now, it's currently housed in chapter 3, which is about the transfer process itself. So there's no change to practice there. 4.101, the manner and degree of supervision in the receiving state. This simply reinforced that the receiving state should be supervising any individual who transfers their supervision under the interstate compact in the same manner and to the same degree as a similarly sentenced person in the receiving state. So there's really no change to practice. They were just reinforcing that idea in requirement. The arrival and departure notifications, there was a change to the time frame in which that notice of departure can be submitted, and that notice of departure is really notice to the other state that the body is moving, right? They're going from the sentencing state to the receiving state, or they're going from the supervising state back to the sentencing state. It's really there as a tracking mechanism. And so this proposal, which we voted no on, allows the state to submit that notice of departure up to 5 business days prior to their intended departure date. And in our opinion, that's not really a valuable tracking mechanism. If you can submit something prior to somebody's departure, how do we even know that they left, when they left, all of those things. So it kind of complicates the process a little bit if they ever left. For 106, which is the progress reports, that proposal failed, which we were very happy about. They wanted to impose an annual requirement for a progress report, which really the intent was to have the supervising state submit a more detailed progress report outlining compliance, incentives, corrective actions, all of those things. And they thought that imposing the annual requirement might do that and would prompt the supervising state to provide some more detailed progress reports, but I don't think that that would have had that effect. I think you would have gotten more reports that just say, Matt Charton's compliant, because now there's this annual requirement.
And also from our perspective, we're always looking at compliance. That's just more stuff our office has to track in terms of, what do our probation departments, our parole officers need to be submitting. Right now, it used to be, when it changed maybe 5-6 years ago, it used to be an annual progress report needed to be submitted. They changed it to submission of a progress report only when the sending state requests it, which makes sense. I want to know how Matt Charton's doing in New York. I'm Florida. I'm going to ask New York to give me an update on it. Now they change it back to it has to be not only when they request it, but on an annual basis. And I didn't see that there was a need for it. Kelly covered the detail that you're not going to get more details. And for us, it would have been a compliance nightmare. We would have probably had to add 2 more staff to our office to be able to continue to track having progress reports.
Yes. 4.111, supervised individuals returning to the sending state. That kind of outlines the process of getting somebody who has transferred under the interstate compact back to the sending state. There's really no change in practice, just was clarifying that the return can be initiated by the receiving state at the individual's request to return, when they've been ordered to return by the sending state, or after their case has been officially rejected. Case closure supervision by the receiving state. This rule also passed. There will be no change to practice, but they did add a reason for case closure to include cases where an individual's departed the original receiving state for a new receiving state. So if Matt transferred from Florida to New York and then wanted to move to Massachusetts, Florida submitted their transfer request to Massachusetts, Massachusetts accepted, then New York can close the case that's under that reason. So not really a change to practice. We already do that. There just wasn't that specific reason outlined in the the discretionary process for disposition of violation in the sending state for a new crime conviction. This is going to impact practice. Currently, this rule allows a sentencing state to forego retaking, I guess, in cases where an individual has been sentenced on a new crime conviction and that sentence included a period of incarceration. The sending state can allow that new sentence to impose for the new crime conviction to fully satisfy the violation, sentence that they would impose for the violation in their state. That requires a in-person or electronic violation hearing, or the judge and the supervised individual could sign a waiver to that hearing and allow that to happen. Now, this proposal has passed. The sending state has to conduct, if they're choosing this discretionary process for a disposition of the violation, there is a requirement for them to conduct that violation hearing. The waiver will no longer be accepted. And this can be done now, not only in cases where an individual has been sentenced to a period of incarceration, but if they've also been sentenced to supervision in the receiving state. The sending state will have an obligation to advise the receiving state of the proceedings that were held within 10 business days of the proceeding. And if the new sentence fully satisfies the sending state sentence for the original violation, or if the sending state, or if the sentence is limited to supervision only, the sending state is no longer required to retake. So
That's a lot.
I know. I'm trying to think of an example, but maybe even in a domestic violence situation, if the person were transferred from, we're picking on Florida, if it were a case from Pennsylvania to New York and the person was arrested and convicted and sentenced to incarceration here or just supervision here in New York for a domestic violence related offense, and maybe they're on for a domestic violence related offense in Texas, our county probation department, I can't speak for Pearl, but our county probation department would be looking for the sending state to retake that person back to Texas on that violation of probation. This, even though there was a probation sentence, this is going to eliminate Texas's requirement to do that. If the person is sentenced to supervision in the receiving state for the new crime, as long as they hold that electronic violation hearing, there is no requirement to remove that person from the receiving state.
So in terms of, this was a good rule, because what was happening is in my case, I was in New York and I was arrested and I was on a 5-year term of probation out of Florida. I got arrested in New York and I got sentenced to 20 years. Florida would still be obligated to come get me after those 20 years under the old rules. And then all I'd do is they'd pick me up, I'd go back to Florida. The Florida judge would say, you just spent 20 years in incarceration in New York, but violation dismissed or time served. And so what it did was it cost counties money to bring them back and forth, only to have the person go in the front door and leave in the back door. So that's what this tried to acknowledge and say, okay, Florida can acknowledge the 20 years Matt Chart spent in New York as a disposition of its violation. Makes sense. But they've kind of opened that up a little bit too much in terms of now they allow supervision to be recognized as a satisfaction of that sentence. I'm split on this because I always say, and I fought this with other states, you submitted a violation based on a new crime that he or she committed in your state. Your court looked at that and said, that person doesn't need to go to jail. We're going to release him or her under supervision. Why then are you expecting my state to come and get him and jail him based on that same set of circumstances? So, but recognizing there are circumstances out there, one that Kelly pointed out, that we wouldn't want that to be an absolute rule, but now it is. So, we've got to reconcile with that and hopefully ask our departments and parole to recognize the public or victim safety circumstances in each case before they just decide to leave that individual in that house.
It also eliminates the waiver option,
Yeah.
which has been used frequently when somebody has received a lengthy prison sentence. The waiver is often used to satisfy that violation hearing requirement, but that's not going to be an option anymore.
And that's troubling because I think states are going to not use this rule because they don't want to jump through the hoops of having a hearing in another state. And they're going to say, we're just going to retake that person, only to have that person come back and be, returned immediately. So that is a good point.
Then we have the probable cause hearing in the receiving state, which also passed. And what this does is place a time frame on the receiving state to conduct that probable cause hearing. So currently the rules don't really speak to how quickly the probable cause hearing has to be conducted. And so now there's a 30-day time frame that the receiving state must complete that hearing within, once it's requested. And then finally, the retaking procedures, in sending states transport and authority during retaking. This really no change to practice. They kind of consolidated 6 different rules surrounding the retaking procedures into two rules. So there is no change to practice with those. That's all of them.
Thank you
I know. Oh, I was gonna say thank you for listening to all of that.
for that review. As we pointed out, these rules have the full force and effect of federal law. They supersede any conflicting state or local law. So these are kind of serious business when we talk about the impact it has on both parole, probation operations, and the ability to make decisions kind of independently. A lot of these rules take that decision-making authority away from states or localities, and they place it in the kind of federal realm. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. We could talk about examples for both, but that's why we really emphasize the importance of we take these proposals very seriously, and we give them a very thorough kind of review. My question to the council is, how can we, or if we can, make this more kind of digestible for you on the front end, so you have a full understanding of the impact it might have on probation or parole operations before we go and cast our votes in the annual business meeting. Now, luckily, we had 2 years to make that decision, because these are every other year voting, unless there's an emergency that they need to vote. So if there's any, I don't want to put anybody on the spot right now. If anybody has any suggestions right now, I'm happy to take them, but I would ask the council to really begin to think about, when these rule proposals come out, we have the opportunity for public comment. So how does the council suggest we get them to you in a format where it's kind of in context, which we always try to provide, it's understandable and palatable for you guys to review and provide feedback. That's important to us. Yeah, nobody has to tell me now, but I ask people to think about that.
I really like this format. I found this really helpful, but what I also found really helpful was then hearing the examples, because this is so new to me and it's so complicated. You all do so much work. And so I would love something like this, but I don't want to burden you all with too much extra legwork, and like how you want to go.
Yeah, again, the purpose of the state council is to kind of advise the compact administrator. That's one of the titles that I hold as a commissioner, as a voting member. So I would, listen to the state council in terms of how I might feel one way, the council might feel differently. And I go there reflecting and voting on behalf of New York State, not on behalf of Matt Church. So that's really why I bring this up. And I want to make sure that when I do vote, I vote consistently with how the council feels, and really trying to do my best to eliminate any personal bias that we try to, when they come up again, we send them out to you. We kind of talk about them beforehand, but if there's a better way for us to do that to help you guys really inform me when I go off to Minneapolis. No, not Minneapolis. It's Minneapolis next year, but that's not voting. So, but we're off to Minneapolis. The more beautiful sand beaches. And the freezing cold in Minneapolis. So.
They rotate the nice locations for the voting years.
Yeah,
I think that was just to ease the pain of the 20 rule proposals.
But I was shocked. I didn't get online and look at the hotel that we're staying at. I walked out of the back of the hotel and there's a beach there. And I said, what is this? We're on a beach, and we were. And Kelly knew, she didn't tell me. Yeah, so Minneapolis next year, that's where we will generate a lot of proposals, and then we'll come back. And again, how do I how do I make sure that, the council feels one involved, two gets information that's understandable and where you guys get, have an informed voice back to me in terms of how we should be voting.
So when you go next year, with the changes having been in effect for a year, do you revisit and discuss how those changes have been implemented, any challenges, those kinds of things?
That's a great question. So these take effect April 1.
Okay.
So these will take effect April 1. And we can, like, if we see something that's, not working or presents some really dangerous situations, or puts people, people who are being supervised in positions where we don't think it's fair, or giving them the opportunities that we believe they deserve, then we can propose a rule to, there's several ways to do it through a region committee. East Region would be one, and then several standing committees that are in place. So that's how we would, kind of try to make a change to a rule that we thought isn't working, or certainly a rule that's we think unfairly applied, or really creating circumstances that present a danger to the public or
You mentioned, I see, like, just in terms of like impact on practice. And so just, to your initial question about what could be helpful, I like the idea of examples, but also to maybe some examples of current practices, in New York State. Just kind of help me at least to have like a frame of reference of, and so does it, I know one change you mentioned that you guys voted against, but have added a lot of, you would need 2 more people to comply with that particular requirement, right? Like examples like that, what is the current reporting practice? And what could be the implications of the proposed change?
And I always recognize, we know the compact, well, those two of them really know the compact inside and out. And how do we talk a language that outside of, the language that we kind of talk about, and make it, so it's understandable to everybody, and using current practices is a good way to continue to improve our efforts.
I'm not sure how comfortable you would all feel giving us your input as to whether or not the rule change would be beneficial or negative to our state when you send this email, but I think that would be helpful as well, given the wealth of experience you all have.
Yeah, and we would do that. We would certainly do that. Judge, thank you. One thing lack is opinions on whether things are going to work and things are not going to work. I mean, Kelly Shannon talked to probation departments every day. I'm sure Scott Hertog for on the parole side, he has parole officers in his office, so they're well aware of how. So we can, when we do provide feedback or proposals to you, we can give you feedback in terms of, what we think is a good idea. Not to sway anybody's. Anything? Anybody ask comments or questions about the rule proposals that passed and the one that didn't pass? Okay. Hearing none, we will thank you for your patience. Kelly, thank you for your very thoughtful and insightful breakdown of those rule proposals. You did a wonderful job doing. Local issues, new business. Kelly and I spoke earlier today. I don't know if there's anything that the commission has. We had some filibusters that we were going to use if we got done at 11:30, kind of use as new business. I think we're now at 12:20. I think we're not going to extend this any longer than we have to, but if the council has any business, anything they'd like to talk about, which kind of blends into my next agenda item, which is really kind of updates. Does anybody have, even doesn't have to be, interstate related, if any council members are told this is something going on, you want to inform the contact on, Lisa, if you have something, Senator, if you have something that you wanted to mention, or John, or Judge, if there's anything that people want to let the council know about in terms, chair towns, if there's anything that you guys want to update the council on, or let us know what's coming up, we're happy to listen and spread the message.
Well, I do.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Lisa.
No, go ahead.
Matt, as we've been working here at the board in order to kind of come before from under our veil, I'd like to make the opportunity that if there's any members of this council that would be interested in coming and hanging out with us a little bit to observe our practices, that's certainly something that we'd be open to do. We're looking for best practices and ideas in how to improve our operations. So if someone is interested, they can feel free to reach out to us, and I'm sure that we can make arrangements.
Thank you, Chair Couch. Would that be to reach out to Chelsea? Would she be the good contact?
Yes.
We will make sure everybody has Chelsea's contact information. Should anybody want to follow up? Thank you, Chair.
So we have an additional component to the work that we're doing now, called restorative support services. And we're basically the kind of support and trauma-informed care that we provide to victims. We're also trying to create a pathway to provide those same kinds of support to families who are impacted on the other side of the line. In terms of, support group, therapy, peer support, and navigating people through the systems as a part of breaking that cycle of violence and harm. So, and that part of the work is funded by DCJS.
Thank you, Lisa. Good to hear. Just so I'm clear, so if my brother ends up committing a shooting, my family outside of the person who did the crime would be able to get support services from your agency.
Absolutely. They could reach out, and we have a peer person. We have 2 people that do peer work, and we have contractual therapists, and so we can make things available. Right? It's a tricky kind of conversation. I've been in situations to where I've been with the victim and then have to contact that same victim and say, hey, I will be in court with the defendant's parent, and then have to be escorted with a police escort to my car, right? So it is very nuanced, the work, but the peer part of it, the folks that are doing the work are extremely, extremely credible on the ground and very much respected. And so, they're a good bridge, right? And so we're having lots of conversations around just how much overlap there is between the circle of harm and the circle of violence and who's doing what. And there's so much overlap that we're just trying to figure out what would it look like above and beyond like the typical restorative justice kind of approach to have these conversations and also having it as an accepted piece of the work. So, but we're doing it very quietly and, keeping some people out of trouble, keeping them in school, getting them therapy, and just showing up. Because the other part of that is that, a lot of folks that are responsible for violence and are going in and out of detention and incarceration have horrific victimization histories. Horrific. Just things that make you slide out of the chair. And so, they may come in if they are accessed this way, even if we don't have contractual therapists available or services available, legitimately, we're still able to serve them on the victim side just based on the victimization histories, right? But this group over here, it's a little bit trickier in terms of getting that information, and kind of unfolding those conversations, because that's not typically been the approach that people have taken with them. It's like, okay, you did this, we're gonna lock you up. Mitigating circumstances do not matter. And, that's the end of it. But I spend enough time with grieving victims that is angry and as devastated as they are, for those who have been involved therapeutically for some period of time. At some point, there becomes this longing to understand, why did you do what you did? Or, I understand why you did. I don't understand why you did what you did, but I understand the circumstances that created the person who was capable of doing what you did. And I want to talk about that. And, what are the mechanisms, and, is it okay? And all those other kinds of things. So that's kind of like, what we've been working on. I was in a sentencing a couple of years ago, and the judge said, the irony of this case, that you are being sentenced for stabbing someone to death, you're stabbing your partner to death, and your 3 or 4-year-old witnessed that, is that you as a child witnessed your mother stabbing someone to death. And now you are a mother and you have stabbed someone to death. And so, the what ifs are endless. What kind of support did that person get? Where were the victim services provider? Like what, so that's kind of where we at, what we're working on, and we'll see.
It's difficult work. Appreciate all you do. What else? All right. Thank you all for coming. We really do appreciate, if you're able to come in person. I think it makes for a really a good, solid meeting. So thank you for those. Thank you for those who joined us remotely. I'm recognizing that not everybody can make it. Beautiful downtown Albany on our days. So
With no parking.
we appreciate you guys joining us. So thank you all. Have a good day. We'll see you in the spring of 2026. So if you guys, everybody take care of themselves, and we'll see you then.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
I was supposed to sign my team on we have a breathing. Okay,